Welcome to another Digital Engagement podcast brought to you by LivePerson. Through its LiveEngage cloud-based platform, LivePerson creates meaningful, real-time customer connections that increase conversions and improve customer experience. I'm your host, Patrick Spencer, Senior Director and Editor-in-Chief at LivePerson. Joining me for the following podcast was Dave Rosenlund, the Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Alliances at GeoFluent at Lionbridge.
Dave, thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome.
I think a good starting point would be to talk a bit about Lionbridge Technologies. When you were founded and what your different product offerings look like. You have a cloud approach, etc.
Okay, well, Lionbridge is actually the largest translation services provider in the world. We're about 20 years old, have been in the business for a long time, and over that long stretch of time have developed a great deal of expertise, as you might expect, in translation services and the needs of global organizations who do business in multiple languages. GeoFluent is from the software division of Lionbridge. So part of Lionbridge is developing software, but the larger part of the company is still in the traditional translation services business, providing human translation for our customers.
And when did the company start moving in the direction of realizing that it's more than just translation? It's software and moreover software in the cloud as where the marketplace is eventually heading?
That probably started about 5 years ago. We have a number of software product offerings. Some of those software products are geared towards translators, helping the translator be more efficient and effective in their translation work. And then some of that software is geared for the large global enterprise that's trying to maximize the value of their previous translations. And then there's real-time translation, which is a relatively new offering for us, which is part of where the GeoFluent offering is part of that product line.
And so how long has GeoFluent been on the marketplace then?
GeoFluent's been in the market for about 4 years, but honestly, in the first 2.5 to 3 years, we stumbled about a bit, not fully understanding where automated translation would be most applicable and deliver the most value, the most bang for the buck, if you will. So about 1.5 years ago, we decided we would focus in on 2 areas exclusively: online chat and global online communities, which at the end of the day, if you think about those 2 use cases, human translation is just not a good fit for either of those. Mm-hmm. And so rather than offering alternative to where human translation might be used, we decided instead to focus on areas where human translation is not viable, is not practical.
Yep. No, that makes sense. Well, let's talk about the value proposition for each one of those 2 use cases. Let's start with the online communities. What type of company would benefit and what type of scenarios would be appropriate fits for GeoFluent when it comes to an online community?
Well, at the end of the day, any global organization or any organization that's doing business in markets where more than one language is being used is a good fit for GeoFluent. The more languages, i.e. the larger the company typically, the more languages that you're trying to do business in, the more value a solution like GeoFluent can deliver. So it's probably won't be a surprise to learn that many of our early customers are very large global organizations that do business in many different languages and many different geographies. The challenges those companies face is that if you think about an online community and where online communities deliver the most value, it's when you have the most participation, when you maximize participation in the online community. Mm-hmm. And if you're segmenting your communities by language, then your smaller markets, people working in the smaller markets, doing business in the smaller markets, suffer because their online community is going to be, by definition, smaller and have a lot less value contained within it. Mm-hmm. If you can automate translation so that every community member sees every post, regardless of the original language, you maximize the value to all of your constituents, no matter what their geography or preferred language is.
And GeoFluent sets up in the cloud. It's a SaaS offering. and it plugs into the community, whether it's a Jive platform or a Lithium platform, et cetera. I assume it's based on open APIs, and the translation is done in real time. How does all that work?
Well, first of all, what you just described is exactly right. GeoFluent is a cloud platform. You put a little bit of code in your online community page, and as a result of that code being there, we'll give the user the option to read the post in a different language. And if somebody enables that, if the online community manager enables that, or if the user chooses that, then they'll be able to fetch that content in their own language, and that all happens in real time. And it happens in milliseconds. So there's a little bit of a delay, but it's not noticeable to the user because we're translating paragraphs at a time, not hundreds of pages at a time. And so by the time they scroll down to the bottom of the page, we've already translated that whole page.
And the time to deployment, based on your description, I would assume is relatively short. It doesn't take long to be up and running with GeoFluent embedded within your community.
Not at all. It typically takes a week or two, but it is an ongoing process. GeoFluent, the quality of a GeoFluent translation improves over time. The more translated content we accumulate for that site, the better the translation. So it's an ongoing process, but the initial process of getting up and running is literally takes a couple weeks.
Now, if we look at the other use case for online chat, which is where the integration point happens with the LivePerson platform, describe what the typical customer is looking for when they approach LivePerson / Lionbridge. It might be a brand new account, or it might be an existing LivePerson account who is wanting to scale to support multiple languages without hiring actual agents that are local and speak the local languages.
That's right. It turns out that with our LivePerson customers, at the end of the day, the most compelling value for them is one of scalability and cost savings. There are a couple of very common use cases. One is you have native language speakers that can support customers in an online chat setting in their own native language because both parties speak the same language. But the pool of those language speakers often is limited depending on geography and language. And so what if that customer is calling...
And expensive in certain instances like Germany or Japan. It's expensive to hire native speakers.
It's expensive to find the people with language skill but are also subject matter experts or people who have to be trained to be subject matter experts. Much, much more cost effective to take an existing subject matter expert and enable them in multiple languages, not by teaching them the language, but by delivering automated translation so that each participant at either end of the chat is interacting with the other person in their own language, but that translation is happening in real time behind the scenes so that each person is reading things in their own language.
And what's the typical customer like? Are they an existing LivePerson customer that is coming to you and they're growing their chat deployment, or are you working with some from the ground up right out of the box as they deploy LivePerson into their environment?
That's a great question. If you had asked me that question just 12 months ago, I would have said it's always the case that it's an existing LivePerson customer now exploring the opportunity for them to reach new markets and more customers in their own language using automated translation. But within the last 6 months or so, we've actually seen things shift so that we're now seeing about half and half existing customers and half people who are just now deploying online chat. But if they're a global organization, they're seeing the market research and they're seeing the other materials about industry best practices that lead them to conclude, language is something I should consider from the outset, not later.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Now, what's I assume it's comparable to deploying the solution into an online community, but what's the time to deployment look like? And I, once again, leveraging open APIs, you're part of LivePerson's app marketplace community, but how does all that work and how long does it take to get the solution up and running?
It can be as little as one day, and that's just to go into the LivePerson console and make the one change that's required to enable GeoFluent. But just like the online community, it typically is a 1 or 2 week process where we sit down with the customer virtually speaking on the phone or over the web and sort of plan out the integration and how things will appear on their page and how exactly they want it to work. Because there are choices that the LivePerson customer gets to make about how the option to use multi-language chat is presented to their users.
Mm-hmm. And that conversation takes place in concert, I would assume, with the LivePerson customer success manager, who's already very familiar with the customer's environment and can provide that integration support or help facilitate it, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. A partnership that we have with LivePerson, among other things, ensures that the customer is being serviced really from both sides of the equation, so that there's nothing happening in the LivePerson platform. We're always involved, obviously, in the implementation of GeoFluent, but we work together very closely.
And then from an ongoing support standpoint, they have LivePerson customer success, but they also have your support organization. How does that work just in terms of maintaining the solution?
Another good question, because sometimes the customer, it isn't clear to the customer, or at least the person that might be experiencing an issue, who they ought to call. And at the end of the day, it ought not to matter, and it doesn't. If they call us thinking it's a GeoFluent problem, but we discover that there's a LivePerson issue going on, we'll work with LivePerson to make sure the customer gets the answer they need. Mm-hmm. And it works the same way if the customer calls LivePerson and at the end of the day there's actually a GeoFluent issue that's causing the pain that they're having. The LivePerson will notify us and we'll get right back to that customer.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Now, in terms of the partnership, it sounds like it goes back about 2 years. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it was about 1.5 years ago that we brought our current version of the product to market, but we obviously started 6 months before that, discovering who are the market leaders, who did we need to work with. LivePerson was at the top of our list for online chat, and so we started working with LivePerson about 6 months before we released the product.
And what was it like working with LivePerson to become a member of the LivePerson partnership community, specifically the apps marketplace?
It was good. I mean, LivePerson, I think, uniquely in this marketplace, understands the value of the whole ecosystem. They recognize that chat and live engagements, our online engagements, are just part of a broader spectrum of things that typically customers are doing. So if you take the simple use case of online chat and customer support, well, online chat is just one component of the customer's overall strategy. So LivePerson recognizes that the value to the customer is enhanced when they enable partnerships and a broader ecosystem of integrated products.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But and I'm sure this happens all the time, a customer or potential customer comes to you and says, Dave, what are 2 or 3 tips that you would give to us that we should adhere to be successful as we roll out our digital engagement strategy, and specifically we address a global approach, multi-language approach? What are a couple of suggestions that you would give to them?
The first one is that we always suggest the customer starts out with a handful of languages, one or maybe more, depending on the size of the organization and their capacity to absorb change. For some of our larger customers, it's 3 or 4 languages. For some of our smaller customers, it's start out with 1. Get used to the platform, get used to this way of doing business, develop an understanding of the best practices that agents need to employ if they're engaging a customer who, on the other end of that chat, actually speaks a different language than the one they do. And then once you've got that understanding and you've developed a set of best practices that should be employed, go ahead and expand into more languages from there. So that's the first one. Start with a limited number of languages. And the second one is really assessing the current state of affairs. It's sometimes surprising to us the number of organizations that think their support agents or their online agents always do things a certain way, whatever the prescribed best practices of that company are, before they even consider additional languages. And a quick audit of their online chat sessions quickly reveals that maybe the company isn't adhering to all the best practices, or agents aren't adhering to all of the best practices that they ought to, even in one language. Because once you understand the impact of those best practices on translation, automated translation, it significantly impacts the value of an automated translation solution. If people are capitalizing proper nouns, using punctuation, not writing in run-on sentences, etc., all of those things will just lead to better translation for the users.
That's an interesting point. So do you leverage some of the insight, the data technologies that are built into LivePerson, like transcription analysis, to go back and bake that into training? So you obviously have your training out of the box, right out of the chute when someone deploys GeoFluent, but then on an ongoing basis, you're constantly working alongside LivePerson to help the customer improve their efficiencies and improve the effectiveness of the chat sessions that are taking place. So do you leverage that transcription analysis, that data that you're able to accumulate from the LivePerson platform for essentially ongoing improvements?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. We find that's critical, especially in the early stages of a GeoFluent deployment, that we're constantly monitoring things for the customer. It's part of our service level agreement with the customer. In fact, I mentioned earlier that GeoFluent gets better as it goes. And one of the ways it gets better is we do monitor things in the early stages of the relationship to look for ways that translation can be improved, so that we're always improving the resulting translation, and that the end user experience is always getting better and better. And one of the ways we do that, as you just suggested, is we monitor the transcripts with the customer's permission, of course, and look for ways that we can suggest improvements, even if those improvements are indirect, like better amplifying certain best practices with agents so that they understand the impact of those best practices when they're dealing with a customer who speaks a different language.
Does that happen sort of ad hoc or on an ongoing basis? But do you also have a formal process where you can conduct a quarterly business review with your clients?
That's exactly right. It varies by customer agreement. Customers ultimately get to choose how they'd like that interaction to work, but by default, it's usually monthly for the first 6 months, and then once a quarter after that. Mm-hmm. But the reality is we're constantly monitoring and looking for issues. We talk with our customers frequently to make sure that we understand what their perception of things is, so that they ever have a perception that the translation isn't of the quality they expect, we'll immediately look to analyze why is that the case. Mm-hmm. And figure out what's needed to rectify that situation. Because we know at the end of the day that GeoFluent can produce great translations for the online chat use case. We've got ample number of customers where that's the case. If a customer is not seeing that result, then we look to see why.
It's that personalized approach that adds the real value at the end of the day, as you just described. That's where customers will see added value of, one, GeoFluent and the Lionbridge relationship, but then two, the partnership that you have with LivePerson.
That's right, and I would tie that back to the very early stages of the conversation where we talked about the history of Lionbridge. It's that 20 years of language expertise that Lionbridge has that we can bring to bear on the automated translation use case, and that's something many of our competitors are not able to do. They may have similar technologies, they may have a great approach, great customer service, but if they don't have that 20 years of a linguistic experience, we know where the pitfalls are. We know where to look, and most likely where we're going to find the things that can be easily improved.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you can only talk so much about future plans, etc., but what can our listeners or customers as well as prospects expect to see from Lionbridge and LivePerson over the next year or so?
We consider LivePerson to be a great partner, and we consider this partnership to be of high value to us because it delivers real value to our customers. So, we participate in LivePerson's partner meetings. We look at their product roadmap and where they're going. And I think it's safe for your listeners to assume that as your platform evolves, as the LivePerson platform evolves, we'll be looking for other areas where automated translation can deliver real value for customers. Safe to assume that we'll have new product capabilities and features that extend beyond live chat in the not-too-distant future.
I think all of our listeners will agree that digital engagement is a moving target. It's constantly evolving and improving and transforming, and I'm sure that Lionbridge and LivePerson will be right there on the cusp of what's happening.
That is our plan. We've identified that, as I said earlier, this is a strong market segment for us. This is one of the areas where automated translation makes a great deal of sense, and that human translation is probably not going to fit the bill in many areas. So grow from where we already have success. There's no point in going and starting all over again in some new segment where we don't have any experience.
Well, Dave, thanks for your time today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Same here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another Digital Engagement podcast brought to you by LivePerson. Check out other digital engagement podcasts at liveperson.com/podcast. LivePerson Solutions, helping you to drive tangible business value from your digital engagements via chat, voice, and content, all delivered at the right time and through the right channel. LivePerson, connections through digital engagement. Bye.